Copyright in these lectures is either owned by the ANU or a third party who has licensed the ANU to use it. Students may use the recording for personal study only. No lecture may be communicated online, copied or shared without the prior permission of the ANU.
Okay, good morning. So, does anyone have problem forming groups? Or let me see. Like you cannot access, basically you're blocked out. Anyone here? Okay, that's good. There seems to be some problems that you cannot get in, right? So, okay, so this week I'll talk about the financial markets in Asia. Okay, so here I will show you, just an overview of what the market looks like, especially the size, turnovers, all these things, and the currency markets. And obviously, can Asian financial centers take over, London and New York, or can it become close to these two financial centers? So that is the big question. And you will see that, in Asia, the size of the market is very large now. So obviously, you need a good financial center, and there has been, like Hong Kong and Singapore has been, known as financial centers, but the question is, like Shanghai or some of the other cities in China, and also Tokyo was also questioned, right? Can it be the major one? So that's what we're going to talk about. And then there are some developments, especially in China's bond markets. So that I will talk about. Okay. All right. So let's start with a size. Okay. So this is 2010. The next slide is 2016. And you can see, well, look at the total amount. It's 54 trillion, right, US dollars. This is the global equity market capitalization. So this is market capitalization. So it is the market value of the companies, right, all, added together. And 2016, the size has, grown substantially, right? It's 70 trillion. Okay, so let's look at the composition. So Americas is basically, dominantly this is US, and then Canada and other countries, and then Euro, Africa, Middle East, and then Asia Pacific. So in 2010, the Americas, the market capitalization was 40%, Asia Pacific was 32%. And if you look at 2016, overall, it doesn't seem to have changed. The proportion doesn't seems to have changed, not have changed. But the total, right, the total amount or the total market capitalization have increased quite a bit. Okay. And this is 2010 in Asia. So this is within Asia, right? So this is market capitalization. In Japan is 22%, China is 23%. So these two, and if you include Hong Kong, will be, more than 50%. If you include, Greater China, like China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, then that will be, 39 to 44%, right? This is 2010. Let's look at 2016. China by itself is 31%. Before it was 23, right? So it's 31%. Japan, 22%, it doesn't change, but China has grown. Hong Kong, 14%. So before it was 16%. Taiwan, 3%, right? 5%. So you can see that the market value or market capitalization of China has grown substantially from 2010 to 2016. And so Greater China, if you look at 2016, that's 45%, right, of Asian market capitalization. So so you can see how large China has grown. Of course, it's the second largest economy in the world, so it's not surprising that it's large, right? Yeah. So in Asia, the market capitalization looks like this. Okay, so market capitalization is a number or the figure, right, that you look at a point in time, right? So which is, I think this is probably at the end of the year, right? You look at the price of the stock and then basically value the companies. So, but let's look at the trade. Oh, okay, sorry. Trade is next, sorry. Yeah, so this is a historical trend of market capitalization, and you can see this blue bar is the Americas. And in mid-90s, right, 1996, so U.S., or yeah, you can see that until maybe 2005, 4 or 5, U.S. basically had half of the market capitalization, global capitalization. But as you can see, this red part, right, this is the Asia ex-Japan. Asia ex-Japan has grown substantially, right? So, yes, so that's basically, see, if you look at the proportions, this red bar has increased, right? And this is the historical, market capitalization. Americas is the largest. It is growing, but you can see the red line, right? This is the Asia Pacific ex-Japan. Yes, so it's something like this, yeah. So, okay. Now the next thing is we look at the trade. Trade is measured as a flow, right? Not at point in time. It's measured, this is probably during, this is for over 1 year, okay, 1 year, okay? So this is how much the stocks were traded over the year, okay? So in terms of the trading, yes, Americas has 61%, right? If you look at, okay, this is 2010, let's look at 2016, Americas 51% has gone down, but you can see, okay, the amount of trading, amount of trading is 82 trillion in 2010. 2016 is 86 trillion. So it did not increase as much as the market capitalization. But if you look at the trade, right? The amount of trade, Americas has, in 2010, 61%. And in 2016, it's like 51%. And the trade in Asia Pacific is 35, right? Asia Pacific in 2010 is 24. So in terms of the proportion, right? If you just compare this, euro has not changed much. So you can see that basically the trade in Asia Pacific has increased. Okay. So now we look at within Asia, the trade, okay? So this is 2010, right? You can see that in the trade, right, of China is 41%, okay? In Japan, it's 22%. So if you compare this with market capitalization, Japan is 22% market capitalization, right? China is 23% in terms of market capitalization. But if you look at the amount of trade, Japan is 22%. So in terms of percentage, it's about the same as market capitalization. But if you look at the amount of trade in China, it's 41%. So what does this mean? Yeah, sorry? Yes, trading frequency is much more, right? In other words, it's called turnover, right? Turnover is very high in China's market. So people trade more, right? Yeah, so, I mean, the number of shares typically doesn't change that much. Of course, it changes if you do IPOs, which we will talk about, but it's basically of the existing, right, shares people trade, right? If you trade more frequently, then this trading volume increases. So this shows that in China, the trading frequency or the turnover is very high, okay? And Hong Kong is 8%, right? So if you compare that with the market capitalization of 2010, 2010, Hong Kong is 16%, China is 23%, right? So compared to that, Hong Kong is 8%, right? So as a percentage, Hong Kong's trading volume is smaller than the proportion of the market capitalization, but China is much, much larger in terms of trading volume. Okay. So it just means that the high frequency, not high frequency, is the turnover is very high. Okay. And you can see, Singapore is known to be one of the major financial centers, but you can see in terms of the equity trading, right, it's very small. Okay. So you might wonder why Singapore is a major financial centers, but in terms of equity trading, it's very small. Okay. Okay. In India, right? We talk about India, but India, in terms of trading, is still a very small amount. Okay. Then we move to 2016. Wow, look at this. Right? It's amazing, right? The amount of trade that's going on in the Chinese market is 62%. Yeah. So you can see how active the Chinese market is. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Also, the amount of value traded is like 19 trillion in 2010, but in 2016 it's 30 trillion, 31, almost double. Okay. Okay, so next we look at the IPO. So this is where the new shares are listed, or new companies, right, become listed. Okay, so when you look at IPO, this is 2018. Yeah, EY is called Ernst & Young. This is material from Ernst & Young, and this dark gray is Americas. Light gray is Europe, Middle East, India, right? And India, Africa, and then this, the middle gray part is Asia Pacific. And if you look at from 2014 up, right, to 2018, you can see that at 2014, Asia Pacific, in terms of the number of IPOs, is 45%, but it has grown over 50%, right? And in terms on the right-hand side is the amount, right? Basically, how much money they raised. You can see that, like in 2016, Asia Pacific had like 54%, right, of the total IPO globally. And 2018, it's 48%. So it's again half, right? So half of the money raised is in Asia in recent years, or it could be more than half, right? So that's why this Asian financial market is becoming very important, right? In terms of the size, if you look at Asia as a whole, it's bigger, right, than US or Europe. Okay, so now look at this by exchange. So where did IPOs happen most? This is 2018. It's in Hong Kong, okay? Hong Kong, right? And in 2018, actually, in terms of the numbers, yes, this is Bombay, this is the India, NASDAQ is US, right? Tokyo is Tokyo, yeah. And New York Korea, Shanghai, right? And Indonesia, London, Shenzhen, right? So these are the top 10 or top 12 exchanges by the number of IPOs. If you look at in terms of the amount, proceeds, which is at the bottom table, Hong Kong is still number 1, New York becomes 2nd, Tokyo becomes 3rd, and so on. But as you can see, right, in this top 12, Asian markets, right? Hong Kong, it's Hong Kong, right? 1, 2. I'm not sure if I could include Australia. If that's the case, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So out of top 12 markets, 7 of them are in this region, okay? Even, let's say in terms of the amount, Hong Kong, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So even in terms of the amount, it's half, right? Of the top 12, 6 are from this area, okay? So that's why Asian markets are becoming more and more important, okay? Especially when you look at as Asia as a whole. Yeah. So that's basically equity markets. And then let's move on to the bond market, okay? Now, bond market, this is the global domestic bond market. So in this case, we're not looking at companies or government issuing bonds abroad, overseas, offshore, okay? We're looking at the domestic issues only, okay? So in this case, where U.S. has 34% of the share in 2011, Japan is 20%, Asia Pacific, ex-Japan, is only 9%, right? And Euro is 32%. So it is quite different from equity, okay? And 2000, okay, sorry, this is Asia, okay. And look at 2011 in Asia, where Japan is like 67%, okay? China is 14%. And yeah, so it looks something like this. So in terms of domestic bond issues, Japan is the largest, okay? Do you know why? Yes, it's the government, because we have been talking, right? I've mentioned that Japan has a huge government, it's the highest government debt in proportion to the GDP, right, in the world. It's 200%. So that's why the government has issued a lot of bonds, government bonds, okay? So that's why the bond market is large. And also, it's called JGB, Japanese Government Bond Market, and it's quite liquid, so it's fairly actively traded. Okay. Yeah, so this is how it looks like in 2011. Okay, in 2016, okay, I don't have the same sort of a figure, but this is in a table. This is total debt securities by residence and sector of issuer. And this is the first column is the general government. The second column is financial corporation, and the last column is non-financial corporations, which is, the companies. You can say that these are corporate bonds. Yeah, corporate bonds, right? The first column is government bonds, and the last two columns are corporate bonds. In terms of government bonds, yes, this is in US dollars. US is the largest, right? And you can see Japan is the second. Now, China has become the third largest, okay? And if you look at this across, in terms of corporate bonds, like US has like 5.7 billion, financial corporations is 15.1, but if you add this together, it's almost like more than $20 billion, which is bigger than the government bond, right? So in the U.S. also has a large, government bond market, but also the corporate bonds are equally large. In Japan, the corporate bond market is not as large as the government bond market. Okay. And then if you look at China, this is what's interesting, if you look at 2016, because China, if you go back to 2011, right, in terms of global percentage, China is somewhere inside Asia Pacific ex-Japan. It's 9%, right? So it's less than 9%. In Asia, it's about 14%. But if you look at here, in 2016, I think this proportion has grown because the government debt or securities is 2.6 billion, but a trillion. But you can see, right, private sector is like almost, 6, right, close to 6 trillion. So this is where something is changing in the Chinese bond market, okay? So we'll talk about this later. And as you can see, this is Australia, right? You can see the size, Korea, yeah. So you can see that the size, right, of US, Japan, and also now China is growing, even in the bond market. Okay. So I already asked this question, yeah, so why do USA and Japan has large bond markets? So this is because the government bond deficit, right? A government budget deficit, right? The government, Japan and US issues a lot of government bonds. So that's one of the reasons. And the second question is, how does investors benefit from investing in international bond markets? This is more like an investment question. Anyone has answer to this? You probably have learned this somewhere, right? In investments, right? You can diversify, right? Yeah. You can diversify your portfolio internationally. And why have bond market not developed in many Asian countries, especially corporate bond market, right? Corporate bond market is still small in Asia. Okay. So, yeah, we'll see some clues, right? So, see, this is the general government gross debt ratio. And you can see that this is just ASEAN 5 countries and all emerging countries. The government debt ratio, this is to the GDP, is not that high, is not increasing compared to advanced countries, which is including Japan and US. So, so that's one of the reasons. This is the, and also the corporate bond market, as I said, has not been, well developed in Asia. But now, this is what's interesting, okay? So this is 1997, this is 2016, so this is, like 10 years difference. Okay, now, if you look at, let's say, US and Japan at the bottom, right? The government bond market is like, let me see, this is 2.7 trillion, right, dollars. US is 5.5 trillion in 1995, and then in 2015, in Japan, it has, the government debt basically has increased like close to, well, close to, not 4, but like 3.5 times, right? And U.S. has increased like 3 times. This is over the 10 years. And you can see the corporate bond market. U.S. has 6 trillion. In 2015, it has become 21 trillion. We have increased more than 3 times. Okay? And you can see Japan, right? Corporate bond market is like 1 trillion in 1995, but in 2015, it has even shrunk. Okay? Of course, this is in US dollars, so that's why it also is affected by the currency. Yeah, currency. So 1995, the yen was very strong. So, but in a sense, no, yen was strong. So that's why US, in terms of US dollar, it's smaller. So, so this probably, actually has shrunk, right? So now look at China. Okay, in 1997, this is right. It's 57.7 billion dollars, right? Government bond, and then 42 in corporate. But if you look at 10 years, this is how much it has increased. Okay, so you can see this expansion rate, right? It's 86 times, right, in government bonds, and corporate is like 50 times. Okay. And so you can see across, different countries over the 10 years, the government bond has also in Indonesia has increased quite a bit. Okay. So I mean, this could be due to like a government deficit, right? Most likely, right? And then like Thailand has increased like 29 times. Corporate bonds, China has increased like 50 times. Thailand like 27 times. So, so you can see that, especially that China's growth over the 10 years is quite large. Okay. So this is where okay, how come this is so large, right? And this is the same numbers, but divided by the GDP. So it's the ratio from the GDP. So, okay, so this is what I'm saying. Japan has the largest government debt to GDP ratio. It's almost 200%. Okay. And so if you look at other countries, U.S. has already 100%, but other countries are like around 50% or around 50% or less. Okay. And if you go back 10 years, yeah, this was not that large in Japan. It was only 61%. Okay. So, but in general, if you look at other countries, other Asian countries from 97 to 2016, you can see in general the government debt ratio has increased, right? Although it's still like around 50%. Corporate bonds also has increased, right? Okay, so this is how it looks like if you compare 1997 and 2016. So about 10 years. Okay. Now this is what's interesting. Okay. This is in China. Okay, because the bond market has expanded quite a bit, right, in China. So where is it is coming from? Of course, it says government, right? Government, right? Here it says government, right? Government. But in terms of when you say government, it looks like it also includes local governments. It's not just the central government, okay? And treasury bonds, so this is, you can say it's a government coming from the government directly, but here it says treasury bonds include saving bonds and local government bonds, so which does include local governments, okay? And then there are other, like government companies, China Development Bank, Export-Import Bank of Japan, of China. So these are, government banks issuing bonds. And here are corporate bonds. So corporate bonds, right, is also quite large. Okay. Now, so why this is actually quite large. So that's why, where is this coming from? Okay. Because we talk about equities, right? Like IPOs of Chinese companies, but we don't talk much about corporate bonds, right, in China. So then where is this coming from? So that's basically, by looking at this, you can see the changes that has been happening in the Chinese bond market in the past maybe 10 years, okay? So this is one of the clues, okay? Now this is local governments in China has been issuing more bonds, okay? So this is from 2005 to 2018. This is the issue per year, okay? And this dark bar is the central bank. And then this is a central government and other government entities. Unfortunately, you cannot differentiate these two by the color, yeah. But the thing is, it has been, increasing. It has increased the issues, right? Has been increasing something like this. Okay. So where is this growth coming from? Okay, and this is actually. Most of them, or a large part of this, is coming from the local governments. Okay. And to talk about this government bonds or the government financings of local governments, we have to talk about this. Okay, have you heard this thing called local government financing vehicles, LGFVs? Have you heard about this? Some are nodding. Have you? Yeah. So local governments in China could not borrow on their own. Okay. So what happened is that since they could not borrow, but they have a lot of local projects, right? Local projects like. Development projects, the real estate projects locally, so they have to finance this, but they cannot borrow directly, right? So what they did was they established this wholly owned corporations, which is this called LGFVs for financing, okay, especially for infrastructure and other projects. So this LGFB, which is actually a local government owns this, right? But it's separate entity from the local government, although it's owned by the local government. So, but then through the LGSV, they provide financing. So who provides financing? Well, banks initially provided financing, okay? But later, this LGFVs increased the issue of bonds. Okay, so that is called municipal corporate bonds, so MCB. Okay, so this is not a government bond. It's not classified as government bond. Effectively, it is a local government financing, right? But by classification, it is not a government bond. It's classified as a corporate bond. Okay? So this has increased. Okay. And this is a Bloomberg news on that last November. So what this LGSB does is not just financing, but they also guarantee the debt of the firms, private firms in that area, in that local region. So because local governments cannot, right? Well, the local governments cannot guarantee the debt of private firms in that area. So therefore, LGFB have been used to provide the debt guarantees. So it guarantees, right? If it defaults, well, the LGSB will, basically guarantee, will basically take on that, will pay, right, for the creditor. So this is a direct quote from this article. It says around 2,000 of these platforms, which is LGFB, have offered a total of 7 trillion yuan, about $1 trillion of guarantees to loans, bonds, and shadow financings for domestic companies. And therefore, these guarantees help private companies get financing, as banks prefer to lend to state-owned ones. So the regular banks, rather lend to sort of state-owned companies. So the local private companies have difficulty getting financing from banks, right? So therefore, if the local government guarantees their debt using this LGFBs, then they can get the financing. Okay, so that's basically the mechanism. Yeah, and then this is an article just this February from Bloomberg. Yeah, so it says, well, the time bomb in China's bond market. So this is what's important. It's off budget, which means effectively this is okay, so LGSV, okay, sorry, not the guarantee, but guaranteeing is another thing that they do, but LGSV increased the issue of bonds, right? But these bond issues by LGFBs are off budget. Means that although effectively it's a government bond, local government bond, but it's not classified as government bond. It's a corporate bond, municipal corporate bond. So that's why, and also the yield, basically the yield, right? The return on the bond seems very attractive. Yeah. And it's also a quasi-sovereign credit status, which means that it's like it's not a government bond, sovereign bond, but it's quasi, right? Because it's issued by this LGFB, and this, right, is increasing, has been continued for in the recent maybe 5 years. So this is where. Although the central government, right, is saying that, okay, you have to lower the debt, right, but instead the local government seems to be issuing these bonds to finance their own projects, and also they're also guaranteeing the debt of the private companies in that region. Okay, so that's why I think people have started to notice this, and then all these. If you look at all these figures, it does, sort of come together because it says corporate bonds, right? But this is probably the municipal corporate bonds, which is effectively issued by the local government. But it is not classified, right, as treasury bonds. Okay. Of course, we cannot see the details of this, but why in China this you can see this corporate bonds, right? But it's probably this municipal. It's basically local government bonds. But it's not local government bonds, but it's effectively, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I think that is probably what's going on, okay? We don't have the, I think you can find at some point, you could find the, the breakdown, but I could not find that at this point. So I had to rely on some of these information, yeah. Okay, all right, so, yeah, so that's what's happening in the bond market currently, and I think according to these articles, it looks like this is like a, some kind of a risk, right? It could be a risk, yeah. So if you look at articles, I think there are some defaults happened. I think some local government, or I think some of the local government bonds defaulted recently in China. Yeah, they could not pay the interest. Okay, so there are things happening in the bond market right now. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Did you know about this, LGFB? Okay. So next we go to the currency market. Okay. So currency. In terms of the currency, right, the dollar, euro, yen, and all these things, obviously the US dollar is like, US dollar turnover is the highest, like 80, okay, let me see. Yeah, this is a question. This doesn't add up. It says percentage, but it doesn't really add up to 100. So, but anyway, it's still the largest in terms of the dollar, right? It's still the largest. And then euro, yen. But you can see that Chinese yuan has grown quite a bit, right? You can see from like 2004 to like 2016. Okay. Okay. And this is where the currency is traded. So this is by region. Okay. Sorry. This is This is the currencies by region. Yeah. So this is U.S. dollars, euro, yen, pound. This is Oceania means Australia, New Zealand, and this is Asia, right? So obviously, U.S. dollar has been, is the largest. And then, but you can see the trend, right? The Asian currencies has been increasing in terms of the trade over years. So this is from 2001 to 2016, has been growing. Yeah, so this number, BIS, is a Bank of International Settlement. The data comes out every 3 years. Yeah, so next year will be 2019. So this year they will have another report. Okay. And yeah, so this is the location. Yeah, this is the location. So this location, as you can see, location-wise, London, right? London has the largest trading, right? And U.S. and actually Australasia overall is about the same, this region, or even more than U.S. If you look at each market, Hong Kong is like this. Actually, Singapore, in terms of the currency trading, is higher. It's probably the highest in Asia. It's higher than Tokyo. Okay. So, as I said, Singapore is known as a financial center, but the stock trading, equity trading is not very large, but actually the currency trading is quite large. Okay, so this is how it looks like in terms of the currency turnovers. Okay, and so the next question is, well, we asked earlier, can any of Asian cities be like a top financial center? Okay, so this is a ranking which is done, I think it's almost every year. So I have this one from 2014. Okay, I'll show you the more recent one. So this is in 2014. We'll talk about how this is ranked later, but London is #1, New York, Singapore, Hong Kong, right? So these are basically the top ones, and Tokyo, Zurich, Washington, San Francisco, so on, and then you have Shanghai right here, number 16. Okay, Seoul is number 12. Okay, and let's go to 2018. London, New York, Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo. Well, this doesn't change, but you can see Shanghai has moved up to number 6. Okay, so you can see obviously the ranking of Shanghai has increased, right? And so how do they rank this? Well, this is very it's a qualitative. It's a ranking. So what they do is they take surveys, like various aspects, and these are only 5 aspects that they show here, but it's much wider than this. So this is business environment, human capital, infrastructure, financial sector development, and reputation in general, right? So these are the things that they look at, and then they rank, based on these things. So like business environment, yeah, London, New York, Hong Kong, Singapore, yeah, so right? So if you look at human capital, all these 4 are always there, except for this one. Financial sector development, Singapore is number 7. And reputation in general, it's, still all these 4, right, are there, okay? And okay, let me see. Tokyo is there on human capital, infrastructure, in this ranking, financial sector development, reputational in general, but in terms of the business environment, it's not in the top 15. Okay, so I'll show you an article that shows why this is the case. This could be the case, right? Business environment is not necessarily, friendly in Tokyo. Okay, and you can see Shanghai. Where's Shanghai? Okay, Shanghai is not here in business environment, but it is here in human capital. Its infrastructure is very good, number 5. Financial sector development is right here in number 11, right? And reputation is here in number 13. Yeah. So, so Shanghai has come up quite a bit. Also, you can see Shenzhen right here. Okay. So this is, how they rank. And this is an interesting article, or it's a report written, this was written in 2000, oops, where is this? Sorry, yeah. 2000, I think it's 2006, yeah, it says 2006. So this is about 10 years ago, right? This is a report written by New York and I think this is the U.S. Senate. Okay? So I think already 10 years ago, they were feeling the threat. New York was feeling the threat from other centers. Okay? So that's why they created this report and then showed what was happening. Yeah, so basically sustaining New York and the U.S. global financial service leadership. So that's the title of the report. You can see the report if you click this. And so this shows that U.S., in terms of the financial stock growth, this is from 2001 to 2005. Yeah, so the growth has been lower than like non-Japan Asia, right? This is growing 12%, more than 12%. UK is 16%, right? Eurozone 10%, but US is 8%. Sorry, this is private debt, yeah. And equities, again, 5.2. In Asia, is 19.4%. So this is when China was, or in other countries in Asia, was growing very fast, right? And then this is the total, right? It's Asia, non-Japan Asia has grown 15.5%, but US only 6.5%. So that's why this report was written, because US thought, or they were threatened by other areas. Okay. And so this is a graph of, this is the IPO, and you can see that, let me see, the US is, I think the US is the dark one. Oops. Yeah, US is the darkest, dark blue, right? You can see that the proportion of IPOs has gone down over from 2001 to 2005, and this Europe is the the light, the middle blue, right? This is obviously larger than US, but you can see Asia, right? Asia is the light blue part, is increasing. So you can see from the, this graph that you can say the market share of US has gone down. And in other financial products, like financial derivatives or structured products, Europe is much more. This is because of London, okay? Yeah. So although like in terms of structured products, Asia lags behind, but now it's probably this has increased much more. Like Singapore is known for these structured and derivative products. So they are not major equity market, but in terms of currencies, derivatives, structured products, Singapore is much more than Hong Kong. Okay. So this is why New York felt threatened. Okay. And then the reason, right? So now they look at why is there any problems with the financial market. So if you look at these items, or this, then you can see what makes a good financial center. So this is the positive part, right, for the U.S., like ability of professional workers. So like a human capital is good, right? Deep and liquid markets, high quality transportation, infrastructure, yeah, high quality of life. Well, maybe, okay. And then the negative side is that, especially here, government and regulators are responsive to business needs, and also fair and predictable legal environment, attractive regulatory environment. In that respect, U.S., you can say New York market is not necessarily the best. Okay. So, so that's why, like regulatory environment, legal environment is important. Okay. So this is how the government regulates the market. In the U.S., one of the problems that people have pointed out is that you have this, the central bank, right? The central bank doesn't really regulate the market directly, but, but they do have influence. But then there is the treasury, right? And then you have other, especially for equities like SEC, right? Securities, SEC, and then I think there is another one. So sometimes in the US, the regulatory agency is not just one. So there are different ones, and then some overlap, right? So that's why the decisions may not be very clear when they have to make decisions, when multiple agencies have to make decisions. Okay, so so that's why SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commissions. So that's quite powerful. So that's why, in terms of the predictability, right, it may not be that clear. So I think those are the things that has been said in the U.S., and it does reflect, in this survey. Yeah. So Tokyo, right? I'm showing you why Tokyo's business environment is not, included, right, in the top, is that this is one of the complaints. This is like 10 years ago. What happened in Tokyo is that a lot of foreign banks and investors complained, okay, about this onerous regulations. So what happened was that there was a Citibank had a branch business in Japan, but then there was some irregularities, and then the government or the financial services agency, this is basically the regulator for financial markets, they closed down Citibank's private banking unit. Okay, so they forced them to close down. So effectively, Citibank had to sell all their business in Japan. Okay, this is for private banking and also consumer, right, banking. So, but then at that time they said, well, how come only Citibank, right? But then the foreigners or the foreign investors said, well, this is because it's a foreign bank. Why don't they do the same thing for the domestic banks, right? Because they might be doing the same thing. So why do they just accuse Citibank? So that was the complaint from foreign investors and bankers about this onerous regulation. So this financial services agency can have a lot of discretions, okay? Yeah, so there's enormous discretion in setting rules. So it's not necessarily based on the fair and transparent rule, okay? So that's why Tokyo does not, well, maybe it's getting better now, but did not have a good reputation just because of this regulator, okay? It has been very discretionary, and that is because the bureaucrats had a lot of power in deciding what to do, right? So it's not based on the clear rule, but the bureaucrats decided on like case by case, okay? So, so that's why, Tokyo's financial market may not have this high, business environment ranking. Yeah. But on the other hand, like Hong Kong, right? Hong Kong is a rule-based, very clear, fairly simple rules, right? And then, so that's why Hong Kong's financial market people say are very transparent, right? And well-functioning because rules are clear, right? And it's not that complicated, right? Singapore sometimes sometimes things may not be clear what's happening. Yeah, because the government, in terms of the regulator, Singapore is one regulator, right? Central bank and the treasury is all together. It's one financial regulator, so that's why they can do a lot of things. They have power, but but sometimes there are things that is not clear, right? So, but I'll talk about this Singapore and Hong Kong at the end of this course. But but this, the case of Tokyo financial market or the regulator is a good example. But it's not a good example. It's a good example of a bad regulator in the financial market. Okay. Yeah. So the big question, right, in Asia is where Shanghai become the leading financial center. So what are the challenges? Okay. So the question is open. It's an open question, but you probably know some of the major answers because currency is one of the things, right? It's a convertibility issue, right? Yeah. So to be a global financial center, the money has to freely flow in and out, right? You need that. And then, of course, the regulator has to be fair and transparent, right? So I think those are the things, yeah. So I guess those are the things that which could be is a challenge to Shanghai. But as you can see, it's changing, right? It's coming up the ranking. Okay. Let's see. Check. Any questions? Okay, so let me talk a little bit. I cannot finish this, but talk about this China's equity market. Okay, so as we have talked about China's bond market, because bond market seems to be, have changed, right, quite a bit. It's not very clear what's happening, especially with the bond market, but at least we can sort of, guess what's happening now. And for the equity market, on the other hand, the equity market, the changes have been very clear, okay, because it has been, the government-led reform. Okay, so when we talk about China's equity market, we have to talk about before and after 2005, because this is when there was this big reform on China's shares. So before 2005, more than half of the issued shares were non-tradable. So even though the shares are issued by the company, it's not tradable. Okay, and they were held mostly by the government and also legal persons. Okay, legal person is not a human being, right? It's a entity. It's a what do you call? It is most of them are owned by governments, right? But it is a entity. Okay, you can say corporations. And then what happened was this non-tradable shares were made tradable over this 2-year period. Okay. And and these are the so-called non-tradable shares initially, right, before 2005. And it says non-tradable, but it is tradable by block transfers, private block transfers. Okay, so this is taken from this article by Franklin Allen, Jun Chen, Yen Zhang and Mengxin Zhao, and yeah. So Franklin Allen is a very famous financial professor now in England. He used to be at Wharton School, and Jun Chen is also, you might know, he used to be at Boston University, but now at Fudan. Fudan University is a new financial center, a new financial school, yeah. Okay, so first of all, yeah, this the non-tradable shares, these are state-owned, right? Yeah. So, and then there are shares that entrepreneur shares. These are like founders, right, of the firm. And then some of the foreigners own these non-tradable shares, probably when they set up some, joint ventures. And so-called, and also legal entity holders. Yeah, and employees also held these shares. But I think the largest one is this state-owned, and probably maybe legal entity holders. Okay. So, and these are the tradable shares. So, in China, initially the firms were all state-owned, right? And then gradually it was privatized and listed. So that's in the 1990s. And then these shares, new shares, were issued, right? So that initially you can say that, okay, the government, state-owned companies, these shares are not tradable. These are held by the government or the government-linked firms, or you can say, right, in Bureau of National Asset Management, manage these shares. And so it's 100% state-owned, non-tradable. But then when you list the company, right, when you list the company, then they issue new shares. So these are the tradable shares. So initially, most of the government firms, state-owned companies, they don't sell these state-owned shares for private investors. What they do is they issue a new one so that the private investors can buy. In many of these privatization outside China, what the government does is government owns 100%, right? And what they do is they sell these government-owned shares to private investors. And then eventually they could sell every one of them 100%, right? So that's the typical privatization. But in case of China, the government held on to this, and then for the private investors, they issued a new share. Right? So that's why these are newly issued shares, and they are typically, well, initially it was A and B shares. A and B shares are basically represent the same, ownership, except the difference is that it's A shares can be traded by domestic investors, but B shares were initially only for foreign investors, and it was denominated in dollars, US dollars. Yeah. But of course, there has been changes. Like in 2003, so-called selected foreign institutions can buy A shares, and in 2001, Chinese investors can also trade these shares, right? So, so there has been, sort of a interaction between A shares and B shares. And then there are this third one called H shares. H shares are the shares issued by selected Chinese companies, and then it's traded on Hong Kong exchange, Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Yeah. But this can be traded by anyone, who can trade on the exchange. Okay, so these are the tradable shares. And I'll talk about this and stop today. So this is not from 1992 to 2009. So this red bar that I wrote between 2005 and 2007, that's when the split share reform happened. So this is, it says, right, non-tradable, the percentage of non-tradable to total shares. In the second column, you can see, right, it's like in 1992, like 1992 to the maybe until 2000, close to 70% or 65, 66% has been non-tradable. And then this is the split share reform between 2005, 2007. And after that, yes, it has reduced to 58% to 53%. Okay. Okay, this is the tradable shares, right, percentage. So you can see, it's like 30% or 28%, around 35%. And then after 2008, 2009, yes, this tradable shares percentage has gone up. And of the so-called A shares, right, it's like only 16% in 1992. Like now, not now, but 2009, the percentage of A shares became like 50%. And of the tradable shares, like most of them are A shares. So, so this is how it looks like. But okay, and so this. Okay, so I was going to stop here, right? Okay, so okay, so I can stop here. I will start with this again. Yeah. Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
This question is examinable because this question on the previous discussion.
Yeah, sort of.
Examinable.
Yeah, sort of, yeah. Yeah.
So we can find this answers ourselves.
Yeah, well, you have to read the articles and go through the slides. There is I think there is on Watto, there's a sample question. That's Australia and
And it's okay. Australia, New Zealand, and Asia.
Combined.
有可能是那个。良好的调整政策改变很多企业这个发行。
Are you undergrad? Undergrad? Can you send me email? Oh, okay, you have, okay. Yeah. I have to assign you to some people.
Professor, I have a question. Why after 2013, there are no more central?
That I don't know. Yeah. But the thing is, yeah. That's the thing increase, right?
I mean the central bank bond.
No, this is basically local and central, yeah, but it has been increasing all the way, and then I think this is most likely from local government bonds.
My question is why central bank bond?
That I'm not sure why.